Joining us now to discuss, Washington correspondent for Spectrum News, New York One, Kevin Frey, and Washington correspondent for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Tia Mitchell. Welcome to both of you. Great to see you.
Good morning.
So trying to explain kind of what went wrong here for them. It's interesting to hear them try to say, well, this is why we didn't do this one particular thing. She seems, Stephanie Cutter there, who is, of course, a long-time political hand here in Washington, played a critical role in the Harris campaign. What do you make of her explanation, Kevin?
I mean, look, it seems like the overarching theme of all of this goes back to one, as you mentioned, the short timeline that they had to operate within. I think part of their explanation when it came to the Joe Rogan was they said they tried to look at maybe doing it while she was in Texas for the reproductive rights rally, and then Trump was actually on at the same exact time, and thus they couldn't do it. Because of that. But they kind of kept going back to these familiar themes of short timeline, had to introduce her because people didn't know her contrary to popular belief, and then also at the same time had to remind people of why Trump was bad, which they said the polling was moving in the wrong direction for them and had been for some time, so they had to combat that at the same time.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting that they kept coming back to the choices they had to make. And yes, they didn't have a lot of time. Yes, there was a lot for them to do during that time. But I think at the end of the day, choices were made. So they made choices about what podcasts they would and wouldn't do. They made choices about what media interviews they would and wouldn't do. And now in hindsight, they can say, well, was that the right formula? But I think we can't take the eye off the fact that they made deliberate choices. If she wanted to make time to do Joe Rogan, she could have, but something else could have fallen off. And maybe it wouldn't have moved the needle, but that's really what we're talking about at this point.
Yeah, so Stephanie Cutter also talked a little bit about her relationship with Joe Biden, because, of course, this was one of those, when she did start doing interviews, she didn't necessarily answer the question of how are you different from President Biden in a way that made people feel like she would be a break from the past. Here's what Stephanie Cutter had to say about that.
On the Biden question, we, of course, got that everywhere we went. And we knew what the data was. We knew we had to show her as her own person and point to the future and not try to rehash the past. But she also felt that she was part of the administration. And unless we said something like, well, I would have handled the border completely differently, we were never going to satisfy anybody. So why should she look back and cherry pick some things that she would have done differently when she was part of it? Mm-hmm. And she had tremendous loyalty to President Biden.
I mean, it's illuminating, Tia.
It is. And I think that was kind of, when you read between the lines of what she didn't say during that interview, that's why. But I think there could have been a better answer in real time. I think she could have made it clear that she is ready to be her own person should she have been elected president, without throwing Joe Biden under the bus or even undermining some of the decisions he made. But instead, her answer kind of fell flat, and it came across that she hadn't thought about what she would do differently should she be president. I'm not saying she didn't, but I'm saying the answer didn't convey that. The answer, unfortunately, conveyed the message that she would be in lockstep in more of the same. And that didn't play when his approval ratings were way down, and a lot of people felt that the Biden-Harris 4 years made their lives worse off.
Yeah, no, so one of the other elements to all of this is that there was some reporting in the wake of the campaign that some of the concern about, say, Joe Rogan or other things may have come from either liberal interest groups or people working inside the campaign, younger staffers. James Carville, he of, profane mouth often, as well as the creator of the tagline, "Is the economy stupid?" Weighed in on some of this yesterday. Unsolicited, I would imagine. But let's watch what Carville said.
The vice president was thinking about going on Joe Rogan's show, and a lot of the younger progressive staffers pitched a hissy fit. If I were running a 2028 campaign and I had some little snot-nosed 23-year-old saying, "I'm going to resign if you don't do this," not only would I fire that on the spot, I would find out who hired them and fire that person on the spot. I'm really not interested in your uninformed, stupid opinion as to whether you go on Joe Rogan or not.
So, of course, again, the profane profanity that Carville uses there. But the point he's making is an interesting one, and honestly, it plays into the cultural war argument overall, that Democrats are more interested in this than they are in winning.
Right. And I mean, this comes, of course, as you also are coming off of months of the protests on college campuses and Democrats struggling to figure out how to navigate that without offending half of the country at the same time. One of the things I think some would probably push back and say Carville is, he won in the 1990s. It is now 2020, 24. But it does play into this whole conversation that they were touching on in this podcast about how do you get to people now, especially folks that are not fully engaged? It seems Joe Rogan was one of the gateways for that, especially when you saw less engaged, less likely to vote folks actually head out to the polls for Trump. And it seems, at least from the recrimination points of view, that's one of the frustrations with this campaign.
Yeah, and briefly, Tia, I do want to just play what David Plouffe, as well as Quentin Folks, had to say about that, the trans ad, right, that we've spent a lot of time talking about it, that basically just candidly says Kamala Harris is for they, them, Donald Trump is for you, a very simple message. Here's what they had to say about that.
Obviously, it was a very effective ad at the end. I ultimately don't believe that it was about the issue of trans. I think that it made her seem out of touch. And it was sort of a pseudo-economic ad underneath it.
At the end of the day, we were spending a lot of time with voters in these battleground states, both quantitatively and quantitatively. And this trans ad was not driving vote.
So it makes me wonder if they were asking about trans as the issue, but that what Quentin Folks was describing there was really what was going on, that it was much bigger than just that issue.
And also, Quentin made the point that the ads were really targeting men, mainly Black and Latino men. So it kind of gets at some of the kind of social divisions, cultural war divisions as well. But it made it seem, she's for they, them, she's not for you, making it seem like Trump is the one who's going to look out for you, make your life better, while Kamala Harris is focused on this kind of culture issue that doesn't speak to your own lived experience. And I do agree that it's not necessarily that particular issue was a driver, but the deeper messaging, it got to key demographics, it got to the economic issue, and it got to the culture war, basically all in one tagline. That's what made it so effective. And again, yes, they talked about the fact that they didn't get asked enough and they had a good answer, but they didn't get to spread that message. Again, choices were made. They chose not to directly respond to that ad.
And again, the best political messages are the simplest ones. Over and over and over again, we find that. Tia Mitchell, Kevin Frey, thank you both for being here on this Thanksgiving Eve. I appreciate it.